Hello and welcome to Backcountry Rescue for Fire and EMS. I'm Chris Enright, and I'm going to be taking you through this presentation today. Thank you for tuning in. First and foremost, important disclaimers. Only do what you're supposed to and allowed to do. This does not supersede your protocols, doesn't supersede your agency regulations, SOPs, SOGs, any kind of rules like that. More importantly, I encourage and implore you to be a thinking practitioner. Stamp out ignorance wherever you can. Understand why a certain action is being taken. This presentation doesn't reflect the views of any agency that I'm affiliated with, doesn't supersede any laws, regulations, SOPs, SOGs, EMS protocols, anything that anyone smarter has told you. So, about me, again, I'm Chris Enright, professional engineer specializing in transportation. I'm the assistant chief at Golden Gate Fire Protection District. I as well volunteer with the Golden Fire Department. I've served as an EMT with an ambulance service. I work designing roads and railroads, but have a lot of fun doing firefighting and that sort of work. Our fire district, Golden Gate Fire Protection District particularly, is about a third open space parks or state parks or something to that effect, with a lot more of the land being open, just being privately owned. So we run a lot of this kind of call, do a lot of backcountry rescue, and really it's front country kind of rescue and park rescue work that we specialize in. So starting about those, talking about the fundamentals of what kind of calls that we are going to and why do we go. First and foremost, I like to think that our district doesn't end at 100 feet away from the roadway. People get hurt in our parks. People get hurt out mountain biking, hiking, hunting, fishing, camping, any of those different recreational activities across your jurisdiction, people can get hurt doing. It's important to spend time learning and understanding what exactly we have to do in responding to this kind of incident and what makes them different from responding, for example, to somebody's house. They're inherently more complex, inherently more challenging, and something that we need to spend time knowing and understanding. Typical calls include things like injured hikers and cyclists. That's probably our most common. Things like a mountain biker who falls going down a steep hill. Mountain biker catches a rock with his knee, something like that. We've got any sort of issues like that that can present in our district. We have folks that get bit by snakes. We can have environmental injuries, so people that get hypothermic, hyperthermic, and then notably in any of your campsites, other recreation areas like that, you can also get medical type incidents. So a person can have a heart attack while they're camping. That's perfectly reasonable and happens somewhat often. Most commonly, these take place in park areas, and notably if they take place on trails. The most critical step, in my opinion, in understanding how these incidents can happen is by taking a pre-planning action, taking some time to look at maps of your area and understand what exactly the risks could be and where folks would be located. The first thing I look for doing a pre-planned study of a map is obviously what's identified as a park. Looking at this map, for example, we have a few areas that are marked in green on Google. These indicate designated park areas, open space areas. Then you take a step back, turn on aerial, see where any different areas of really non-populated spaces are that you see people out recreating. Consider using something like CalTopo or other mapping softwares that allow you to see where structures are located, where trails are located, things like that. Talk to members of your team, learn where calls have happened in the past and what things look like, and then finally gain the understanding as a recreational user of where someone could get hurt. Use your professional judgment. Think about steep trails where people could get sick, injured, anything like that. Those are all pretty critical in understanding this for yourself. Some terminology so that we are on a common operating picture. First, the term search area describes an area designated for a specific group of resources to search. So when we sector out a search area, you define specific areas. Point last seen is where on a map the victim was last positively identified. Last known position is the point where a victim, some sort of evidence of the victim could be identified, be it footprints, be it any kind of those different components, physical evidence, clues. Probability of detection is a term used to describe the likelihood of finding a victim given those search parameters and criteria and techniques that you're using. Some important reminders before an incident. First and foremost, physical fitness is going to be essential. These are inherently physical activities. You need to go out and hike and walk and find people. You cannot be out of shape when performing these sorts of operations. You need to maintain a fairly high level of operational readiness. This is both maintaining knowledge of what needs to be taking place and maintaining the skills, knowing how to use your gear, how to use all those different assets that are available to you. Your equipment needs to be in pretty good readiness, and you need to have both personal gear and team gear that is appropriate for going on this sort of thing. We'll talk more about equipment later, but it is absolutely essential that you take time to think about gear early rather than later. It's very difficult to try and improvise a few of these essential bits of equipment. So, knowledge and skills that you need to have if your district has the propensity for running backcountry rescues. Gaining general outdoor skills is probably the most useful thing you can do. Spending time outside, understanding nature, weather, how terrain influences your movement, all of those different things that you gain from just spending time outside and enjoying yourself. It's also good for you. Like, hiking is great. Go do it. Very simple. Land navigation is going to be an essential skill to have as well. The ability to look at a map, interpret a set of probably marginal directions, marginal instructions of where a person is located. You need to know and understand the different coordinate systems that are in place, knowing the difference between MGRS, UTRM, or simply just UTM, latitude, longitude, any of those different systems, and knowing how to use different mapping softwares on your phone. Those all are essential in knowing and understanding and being capable in the field. You need to learn and understand extended care medicine. What do we do to take care of people for an extended period of time? Not just the 10 minutes it takes to transport from the nursing home to the hospital. There's a lot more going on here. Knowing and understanding trauma care is equally important. How do people get hurt? How do we manage those injuries? And how do we prevent shock and other sorts of debilitating after effects? You need to have your physical fitness in a good place. You need to be good at hiking. You need to have endurance, both physical and mental endurance, to be out for hours doing hikes, walks, carryouts, anything like that. For those of you in a command role, for those that are working to understand and manage the situation, there are 3 key points you need to understand as you get toned to and are preparing for backcountry rescue incidents. First and foremost, they are extremely labor intensive. You need at least 12 personnel in the field for backcountry rescue to go successfully. That is 12 to go well. You need to have 12 people. That is even if you have a wheeled litter. That is even if you're doing some of the easy things and it's a relatively simple hike in a relatively simple location. You should be prepared to rotate crews. It is exhausting, difficult work to carry a person out over a long distance. Having support to be able to rotate folks in and out and to be able to manage that work-rest cycle is critical. Having good overhead matters here too. Having an incident commander who can be stationary, watching progress on a map, thinking and managing resources, and understanding that whole situation is essential. Calls go well when there's good overhead that's paying attention and making good decisions. Calls are also extremely time intensive. A short, easy backcountry rescue is 1 to 2 hours. Long versions of this incident can go multiple days. Make sure that you're planning for backfill coverage into your district to make sure that you can handle regular calls for service. Make sure that you're planning for relief, work, rest. How are people going to rest? How are people going to get food? Are people going to get water? How do we manage all of those different things? Finally, these calls are extremely communication intensive. So you need to be prepared for this to entirely saturate a radio channel. If you have one available, get a secondary radio channel. There's a lot of chatter of, I'm at this location, patient is at this location, status updates, communication with coordinates, landing zones. All of those different things are extremely taxing on a radio system if there's other calls going on. Move to a secondary channel if you can. Additionally, you need to know the limits of your comm systems. Some of us in the mountains are using 800 megahertz systems that don't necessarily perform super well up there. Knowing and understanding where dead zones are, where you can be, that allows for better flexibility, considering bringing dual mode or a second radio so you can switch to VHF if you have to. All essential and critical thoughts to be prepared for comms to be successful. So, as it's been said, amateurs talk strategy, pros talk logistics. Let's talk logistics. First and foremost, your equipment needs are going to be different. Different from a regular medical call, different from a standard crash, different from any of the normal kind of incidents you'd be going to other than really the sort of remote backcountry rescue. First and foremost, your structure gear is not appropriate. Don't be wearing a bunker coat. Don't be wearing bunker pants, bunker boots. Bunker coat is like, okay, if it's super cold, but you're better off with a better jacket. Be prepared to be outside. Outdoor gear is kind of what we're thinking. For personal protective equipment, a helmet can be mandated by some jurisdictions, not all jurisdictions. I request my guys to wear helmets when there's a risk of falling objects. If we're out on a trail in the middle of nowhere, and the only thing that could fall out of the sky is an airplane, helmet's not going to help you very much. Wear a good hat. Protect yourself from the sun. That's real PPE in my mind. Consider mandating or consider having people wear wildland shirts, brush shirts, something like that that's visible. We're working on getting sets of sun shirts, so brightly colored, nice visible, but also keeping the sun off of you. And make sure that if you're doing rope work, you have the appropriate PPE for that. So if you're going to be building a system, doing any of that stuff, you're transitioning to a rope rescue incident, you need to follow those rules. Your personal gear. So we're thinking in the 10 essentials world. What do you personally as a rescuer need to be carrying? You need to have appropriate clothing for the elements. Year round, you need to have warm clothing and you need to have rain gear. If you are operating in Colorado, if you haven't been doing that for very long, you should learn that this is essential. Those of you who have been around for a while, it's a good reminder for all of us that having warm clothing in the summer is always a good plan, and having rain gear in the summer is an essential plan. Bring some food with you. Have some kind of non-perishable snacks, something that can keep you going and that can potentially be shared with team members, victims, rangers, anyone who else is not prepared. Hydration, bring water. Consider bringing some kind of electrolyte replacement if you're out in the field for a long time, but you need to stay hydrated. You're not doing any good if you become dehydrated and become a heat casualty when it's 95 degrees out and you're trying to hike out the guy who is hiking in 95-degree weather. You need to bring a light source. Headlamp, flashlight, anything like that. Just because the call comes in at 12 o'clock noon, it's bright, it's sunny, it's beautiful, it's a great day. Bring a flashlight with you because you don't know how long that incident's going to take. Maybe you need to signal to a helicopter. You need to bring a light source. Bring your appropriate communication equipment. Bring your radios, bring a cell phone, bring a GPS unit, all those different pieces that you use to communicate. You should have a notebook and pen as well, especially if you're delivering patient care or you're assisting in the deliverance of patient care. Having the ability to take notes, capture coordinates, do any of those different things is essential. And then you need to have whatever mission-specific items you're assigned. So you may be tasked to carry a medical kit, you may be tasked to carry rope gear, any of those different pieces. You're responsible for carrying that sort of thing as well. Plan for that space in your personal gear. So I like to have a slightly larger backpack than I know I'm going to need for my personal gear. So I can fit some team gear in there. I can toss some extra water bottles, a blanket, some IV bags to keep warm. Any of those different things are going to be critical. So the team tools that we're going to use to effect rescue, what we see in this picture is a Stokes basket with a wheel. That is going to be our biggest and best asset, our equivalent to an ambulance when we're out in the field. I don't have any particular ideas on which Stokes baskets are good. Make sure it's reliable. I don't like the toboggan ones as much because they're just a little bit heavier. So like this one that you see that is just a solid plastic shell, not as big of a fan. I use kind of the classical kind of mesh ones. Wheels, make an educated decision based on your district. I have one truck with a narrow wheel, I have another truck with a big fat ATV wheel, and the third truck has a nice fat tire wheel. Everyone seems to love the fat tire wheel so far, so like a fat bike tire. They're all different. Know your terrain. Know and understand what makes the most sense. Talk to your people. Consult, work as a team if you figure out if you're buying something new. For medical equipment, you need to be prepared to treat for shock. You need to be prepared to protect the patient from the environment. So remember, it could start raining. Remember, it can get cold. Remember, the conditions can change. Make sure you can protect them from that condition change. Vacuum splints are my favorite piece of backcountry equipment that I think is dramatically underutilized and that we should be emphasizing the use of. For your spinal immobilization, for just what you're laying a person on, the vacuum splint is your choice. It is far more comfortable for the patient. It is far lighter than a backboard. It is easier to work with, and everyone is a lot happier when it's in use. Remember, we're thinking extended care. So whatever else you need, thinking about how long it takes to care for a person and what you're going to be doing for like an hour plus of patient care, bring those things with you. Bring more IV bags, bring extra medications, bring extra this, that, and the other, because the call can take a lot longer than you think. You may need to bring rope rescue equipment. You may need to bring secondary extrication equipment. You may need to bring other bits of gear like that. This is an essential portion of planning for a recon team to go out and make patient contact, figure out what you need so that you don't have to send people hiking back. It's always a good plan to avoid. So as we talk about preparing ourselves to go out on these incidents, knowing and understanding the hazards is going to be first and foremost. The environment is our biggest hazard. The challenges created by terrain, so physically just being a long way to go, are pretty significant. Weather compounds that. Hiking in the snow, hiking in the rain, hiking in the midday sun in the summer, all make things more difficult. That is our biggest hazard, and it is the most essential hazard for individual responders to mitigate. So stay hydrated, stay protected from the sun. Animals can present an environmental hazard as well. My district has had a few very serious snake bite calls over the last couple of years, and going to these calls, we've encountered more snakes. So making sure you've got some kind of tool to deal with a snake. I've seen trash hooks turn out pretty well. So like someone grabs a trash hook off the engine and you hike with that and you've got a couple feet to get it out. A stick works pretty well too. So you've got options. Another environmental hazard, broadly described as a navigational breakdown. Don't get lost. It's really bad form for you as a responder to get lost while you're out hiking looking for somebody. You get lost, they're already lost. This isn't a good time. Know where you're going. Some of our mountain communities can be a little bit aggressive towards outsiders. So knowing your area, being prepared to be careful as you approach any kind of people in a shack or anything like that. Be smart. Know and understand what clandestine labs look like, what cannabis grows look like. Some areas of our mountains are subject to avalanche blasting, so knowing what unexploded ordnance looks like, useful skills to have. Remember, our operation creates hazards too. You can get dehydrated just by being out hiking. You can have exhaustion and fatigue and all of those things that make things more difficult and really do present a hazard. Finally, poor communication is an operational hazard. Making sure that we know and understand how we can communicate and keeping that clear and effective is essential. How do we get there? Usually, we're hiking. That's why these are often described as hike-in calls. We're going in on foot with the Stokes and with all the equipment to go find them. You can be creative and drive there if you know the area and know where your roads exist. We're going to talk a little bit later about our landowners being a useful asset and having the right kind of tools and equipment to be able to get there. Super essential. Some jurisdictions have started biking in. Our open space rangers here in Jefferson County are great at this. A lot of their ranger patrols are done on bike, and so I've had rangers make initial patient contact on bike. They're there in 10 minutes after we're on scene. It's amazing. We barely have the Stokes put together and have a team ready by the time they've already made patient contact. So bike as an initial patient contact tool is fantastic. You can gain access using a helicopter as well. So notably, Flight for Life will do the lift ticket program, so they can drop you off if you're properly qualified and they have the apparatus available. There are other helicopter assets out there that can help out. Finally, you have the opportunity, you can think about this, if it's going to be faster or easier to cross a creek to get to where someone is located. Taking a shortcut is okay. This isn't about a fair fight, it's about an effective fight for patient care. Take shortcuts, use whatever assets you have. Yeah, it doesn't count as a good hike, but because you drove half the way, but driving half the way is faster patient access, faster patient transportation. So your patient transportation most commonly is done via ground walkout. We can walk with them. So we've had this happen where somebody gets they come up from sea level, they've had a couple drinks the night before, they go out hiking and like, oh my God, I feel terrible. It's like, of course you do. let's give you some water. Let's kind of take a rest in the shade. Let's enjoy some electrolytes. It's like, how you feeling? You feeling better? Great. Let's hike out with you. Let's make sure you get back to your car. We'll get you back to a shortcut and get you out. That's ideal. If the patient walks out, you're not carrying them out. You can help the patient walk. So this is the classic, like, hey, lean on my shoulder. We're going to walk a little ways, take a load off. You can help them with a cane, something to that effect. Stretcher carry, this is where we load the patient onto the Stokes basket and we're hiking out with them. And then finally, we have our vehicle-based options. You can drive to a lot more places than you think with a Ranger truck, a fire truck, or a small ambulance. Things like a brush truck are great assets for you to be able to get far into a park and pull a patient out without really walking very far. Some districts have UTVs, EUVs, four-wheelers, whatever term you use for them. Make sure that they're set up safely for use, though. One that is used for groundskeeping is not necessarily ideal for patient care. Some districts have them with a stretcher mount in the back so you can lay a patient down. Others will just seat them in the front seat, put a seat belt on them, and that'll work. We can also use a helicopter as our patient transport solution. So you have your point of injury in the middle of the field. You can fly a helicopter directly to them as soon as you find them, and then it's nice and easy. It just goes straight to the hospital, or you can do a helicopter short haul. So this can be doing a long line carry, short haul carry, where access is made with a hoist system or something like that. Patient is then transported short distance with a helicopter, then to a ground ambulance that takes them the rest of the way to the hospital. Depends on your assets, depends on what you have and what you're qualified to do. So let's talk about the process. How do we perform search and rescue in the field? And knowing and understanding this process is critical for how we derive our operational flow in what we do. Search itself, a couple key points to know and understand. First and foremost, search is an emergency. This is not a recreational walk in the park. We're moving with a purpose. We are treating this like an emergency. Notably, a person may need urgent medical attention. Someone who falls, breaks their leg, could have a femur fracture that is causing them to bleed out internally. This is pretty significant. Second, we treat search like a mystery. So we take logical action, examine clues, make decisions based on most probable things that we have. That leads us to a successful outcome. So we're focusing both on clues and the subject. Generally, there are more clues than there are subjects. We follow the clues, we find the subject. That works pretty well. So we can use footprints, we can use things like that. Focus on the aspects that are critical for success. We are focused on being fast, we are focused on being effective, we are focused on kind of being as easy in all of these things as we can be, keeping big tools available for us in the future. We got to pay attention to know if the subject leaves the area. This has happened to me in the past where we had a 911 call of someone who got hurt on a trail. We didn't have clear information as to what happened. We never got a good description of them. So a bunch of folks started hiking in. This is great. Pretty standard kind of call. No one's finding anything. We've passed the area that we're looking for. We've passed all of this stuff. And they'd say, like, they said they got hurt on the trail. They were on a mountain bike. That means they were probably on the trail. What's going on? Eventually, we sent a sheriff's deputy to go check that person's house. They'd gotten home. They hiked out or walked their bike out, got home, and then we're going to go to the urgent care in the morning. We were getting mounted up to perform a whole huge ground search effort. The subject had left the area. We found them at their house, and we had to get everyone out of the field, and the night was falling, and it was a whole thing. So know if your subject has left the area. Finally, grid search is our last resort. The faster and easier we can do this, if we can do big, easy searches and check the most probable locations, that is our primary objective. If we have to resort to a grid search, a lot of stuff has failed. We're going to need a lot of resources, and it's going to be a bad day, probably for that victim. So searches are an organized, deliberate, and structured process. We should not be proceeding with search and rescue operations in a hasty, disjointed, crazy, kind of discombobulated way. You want teams to function well. You need a clear and effective chain of command. This is still an emergency response. We are not doing anything out of the norm by saying that we need to have a clear and effective chain of command. We need to have clear and effective communication. We need to have proper personnel accountability, and we need to be prepared and squared away to go out and do this work. Teamwork is essential. We are functioning as a team. We cannot affect this sort of operation as solo rescuers. You got to have minimum 2 people with every group, and each team needs to have a leader. That's someone who the command is working with directly. You have to have clear communication, and it needs to be organized. What we like to use for operations in the front country where we've got potentially fast searches but could be more complicated is what I like to call the 2-team concept of operations, or CONOPS. This is a simple concept of having a recon team and a rescue team. So the recon team, team 1, is responsible for locating the victim. They perform a hasty search. They go to the last known position as fast as possible, bringing 2 to 4 rescuers. At least one of them is an EMT. They've got medical equipment to stabilize the patient, and then we've got just enough to get started, but they don't take the stretcher. They are moving fast, they're moving light. Their objective is to get to the victim and to figure out what's going on. The second team, we'll call it team 2, potentially more teams than that could be following. They are bringing the equipment and they are performing the rescue effort. So this is 4 to 6 rescuers on each one of these teams. Usually we'll need about 12 people to do this, so this could be up to 10 more people. Bringing in the medical gear, Stokes basket, rescue gear, ropes, any of those different pieces that are needed to perform that rescue work. They all leave to the victim location and that team departs. They're not searching, they're rescuing. They're going directly to that patient location that the first team has found. So they're fresh, they've walked the least distance possible because they've been carrying the most gear, and then they're ready to hike out with that victim as we go. So in operation, this looks like this. We start with a size up. So like every good incident that we go to, you size it up, establish command, figure out what's going on. Interview witnesses if there are any. This works. You talk to people coming off the trail like, hey, did you see a guy wrecked on his bike? Yeah, he's like a mile down that way. It's like, fantastic. I've got more information now. Get as much information as you can. Determine your probable needs. Heard this is a mountain biker who crashed his bike at this location. Great. I now know a fair bit of information and I can formulate a plan. You need to formulate a plan. Your size up concludes with an IAP. Develop that and then direct your teams to begin work. Your search team or teams, it's okay to use 2 search teams, 3 search teams if you need to come from different approaches to reach a different location. They're responsible for locating the victim. So you send that first team in to perform a hasty search. They assess the victim condition, develop a plan for transport, and treat the victim. Then you begin the evacuation. So team 2 brings in all that gear for evacuation, extended care, and then works with team 1 to perform that patient evacuation. So they hike out. Your search tactics. So we've started to use some of these words, and we'll kind of dive into that a little bit more. First is a rapid or a hasty search. So I've said hasty search a couple times. That is a lot of what we are performing. This is using what's called a route search. So we follow an established route. So we're going down the Mustang Trail to go locate a victim. We had a pretty good idea of where they were located. We got some patient coordinates from dispatch. They said, hey, I'm here. Okay, great. We hike down a trail to that location. It's quick. It's typically very, very effective. This is 95% of the hike out calls that we run. You can do a parallel route search. So this is where you have one rescuer stays on the trail, and then we separate out a little ways away with rescuers on either side of the trail, and then they walk along, staying in sight of the guy staying on the trail. It increases our coverage area. It increases our probability of detection. This is starting to look a lot more like an area search. Area searches are focused on what we have low coverage and high coverage. Low coverage is doing kind of a big spread out search pattern, and then high coverage is where we're walking in a straight line looking for things like evidence. So as I said, a hasty search is focused on being a rapid and high effectiveness search. So we are quickly going to a location where we think the patient is located. We're doing this fast, it's simple, it's easy, and it's a reconnaissance kind of effort as well as a fast search. Our team consists of 2 to 4 team members, so we're moving fast. It's not a big long train of guys walking. They're carrying enough medical equipment to stabilize, and they're carrying some gear to search with them. The technique is pretty simple. Have a set of coordinates, hike to the coordinates. Follow the trail, paying attention for what's going on, being alerted to what's happening, like, hey, there's a weird bike track that goes down this hill. That's odd. Let's go take a look. Doing things like that. So we're checking areas that are most likely for people to be located. We follow those suspected travel routes. Once we get to where the patient was located, we continue, or where the location was reported, we continue a little bit further. We think about, okay, coordinates can be on, coordinates are usually off. How far can we go? Do we want to look at other search and then start to spread out on diverging routes, looking for where the victim is most likely located? So here's a map of a park up in my district using this pen. So we got a report that a victim was located somewhere out on this trail. Yeah, right about there is what the coordinates said. So what do? We hike there. So we park here, and your hasty search just consists of hiking downhill to find this guy. So first team goes in, we go find him. If we don't see him there, we'll keep going a little ways. Keep hiking. Maybe we'll have a second team come in this trail because you can drive this whole distance. That's just local knowledge. So you can drive in a little ways. Maybe we'll see what's out there and start looking around. So relatively simple concept, simple process. We're just out, we hike to the location we think the victim is at. So our area search tactics are taking this another step further, thinking about how we're spreading out, covering terrain, getting off trail. So this is where we are spreading out a big team or performing a large search effort to see where we can find people and checking most probable locations. So a low coverage area search, or better known as a grid search as soon as we start to talk about this, doing a low coverage grid search is going to be having rescuers spread out over a large area of terrain, sticking to high points, sticking to areas of easy movement, looking for logical places where a person can go. And then rescuers as a team are assigned an area, and then they proceed through it on a relatively broad grid. They don't have to stay within sight of each other. You're just searching that whole area with relatively high confidence of a probability of detection, but still moving relatively quickly. It's a balancing act here of how much can we search in how much time. If we don't find anything with a low coverage search, and we've checked the patient's house, and we've checked with the hospitals or anything basic like that, we then switch to a high coverage search. This is where we're performing a very detailed grid search. For those of you that have done wildland work, this is doing like gridding out for smokes, or line up like an arm's reach apart from each other, and then we start walking forward and we're looking at the ground, looking for clues, obviously the victim, anything like that. We don't have to be arm's reach apart. You can just be line of sight from each other, but we're looking very, very closely at the ground for anything like that. This is very detailed. It's very unlikely that we miss anything. It's super slow and super labor intensive. This is a huge personnel effort if we are switching to an area search kind of tactic. Really, if we're switching to a high coverage area search, that's a big lift. So what that would look like, so we've got roughly the same map slice here. Make sure I grab my John Madden pen. We heard the victim was somewhere up in here. It's like, ooh, that's kind of a pain. What do we do about that? Well, we tried hiking in, we can't find anything. So we'll start to just search on a methodical pattern from one direction to the other. So team spreads out, works their way through, sees what we can find. So relatively high coverage, and we work our way to a confining point, and then at the trail, we kind of close out this terrain, and then we close out searching this big chunk of terrain. So if we find him, he's there, cool. If we don't, we move on to another piece of terrain nearby that is the most likely place for him to go, probably downhill or toward a road, and we spread out and start looking. So we focus on doing these kind of searches as a last resort. We don't want to spend a lot of time and effort doing this when we can just walk somewhere. So our techniques, really there's two key techniques and two key things to be thinking about. First and foremost is attracting attention to yourself. The victim should be able to know that you're searching for them. You should be making so much noise and being so visible that even if the victim doesn't quite be able to see you, you can't quite see them, they know that, hey, this is the time to yell. This is the time to try and attract attention. So you as a rescuer need to be very easy to spot. Have an obvious visual appearance. You should not look like a generic hiker. You should be in something brightly colored, wearing a helmet, wearing a fire department hat, carrying a bunch of medical gear. You should look like you're searching for somebody. You should be making a lot of noise. The classic, like detailed search and rescue tactics involve using whistles, doing shouting, all kinds of super aggressive attention gathering techniques to see if you can get a response from a person in an area. Second, we use the concept of confinement. So knowing that a person will likely try and find a travel route, and then we'll use that. We want to cover those trails and make sure that we know if someone is leaving that area. So if you're performing that grid search that we started to look at earlier, posting somebody up at the trail junctions on each side of it, super useful, so that if that person finds their way out in any direction on a trail, you've identified them, you found them, and you can end the search without missing them or them wandering out of your search area. So when you find the victim, because you're going to find the victim, success is our goal. Start by determining your location. Where are you? GPS coordinates are great. I will usually provide both GPS coordinates and a distance along a trail. So, for example, this is on the Apex Trail. My patient is located 1.5 miles up the Apex Trail. That is equivalently useful for the next team coming in as providing actual lat-long coordinates. So the point where they can internalize that very quickly, they know and understand where they're going. It's a, cool, I'm following the Apex Trail, 1.5 miles. They can start an activity on their smartwatch or whatever, and it's like, great, odometer start 0 at 1.4, I'll start to see them at 1.5, there they are. And you have easy navigation that way. Second, perform a victim assessment. What's the deal? What do you have? What's the scene? Do your own size up as the first arriving rescuer. Can they self-extricate? Can you start that process early? What resources do you need? Do you need ropes? Do you need the stretcher? Do you need to build a complicated system? Are they in a crashed vehicle way out in the middle of nowhere and you need to bring in hydraulic tools or something insane like that? What's the extent of their injuries? Are they critical? Are they not so critical? Is this a helicopter as a priority, or is this a ground evac as the priority? Then develop a plan for extraction. Are you hiking? Are you flying? Are you driving? Are you going to do something that's a combination of those things? Develop a plan. That's your responsibility as the first person to find them. Once you have done all of this, then you radio command. Don't get on the radio with just some of this stuff. Give them this whole package of, I have the patient at this location, they are this condition, with these injuries, my needs are as follows, my plan to extract them is this, let me know, are you sending them and what do I need? So be very clear with command, help them out, give this kind of information early. So now that we've located the victim and we've started to deliver patient care, let's dive into some more details on how we deliver care and some recommendations on extended treatment and how we do that. One of the most critical parts of delivering patient care in the backcountry is having effective and good patient packaging. This is the action of securing a patient to the stretcher, making sure they are warm, making sure they are comfortable, protecting them against the elements. If we don't package the patient effectively, this really does make things a lot worse for them. Making sure that we do a couple of good things before we package them, though, is essential. Do your bleeding control before you start moving. Patients should not be bleeding actively while you transport them. Get that under control, invest those 5 minutes. Same with a lot of basic wound care. If you have 5 minutes to kind of rinse out some injuries, bandage them up nicely, that's just going to make everything a little bit more comfortable and a little bit better for that patient. Same with any kind of splinting, pain medication administration, things like that. You should be definitely thinking about doing on scene. Your extraction is the next most important piece of patient care. Getting the patient out of the backcountry, get them to the hospital. We're going to move relatively quickly. It's a methodical but still deliberate, quick movement. You're focused on getting out. You need to be safe. If it's going to take twice as long as you hiking in, that's perfectly fine. Take your time, be effective, get them out. You're doing a lot of ongoing patient care as you go. You're reassessing, you're administering fluids, you're managing warmth and hypothermia, and then you're taking care of any kind of other patient needs that they have. Notably, patients may need to vomit, they may need to urinate as you're out in the field. So those general considerations as we plan for this and think about performing your extraction, first and foremost, do the minimum effort. It's okay. Do as little as you have to, because that is making things better for everyone. Don't carry a patient that can walk. If the guy can walk out safely, walk out safely. Don't do complicated interventions if simple ones are going to work fine. This is a question of like, are you giving opiates or giving NSAIDs? One of them requires detailed monitoring, the other does not. There are studies that show that NSAIDs are just as effective as opiates for this kind of field trauma care. Think about what is going to make everything easier for you as you go. Consider the treat and wait option. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, this heat exhaustion patient. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They ran out of water. It's like, well, great. I brought some water. Let's give you some water. Let's hang out. We'll relax. We'll take some time in the shade. And we make the patient comfortable enough that they can walk out. This is a valid technique. It makes sense. It works. It can be a little bit atypical, but it's there. Patient's feeling crummy. Great. Let's try Gatorade, granola bar, shade. That tends to make me feel better when I'm feeling bad on a hike. Let's see if it works for this person. Obviously, do a very good job making sure that they're not allergic to anything that you're giving them. Make sure that everything's like above board. Make sure that you're not giving them snacks that you're not supposed to have, anything like that. Stay above board, but you have atypical options there to help you. Administering NSAIDs in the field or in the backcountry is always a great idea. It allows you to start that pain control process without the worry of opiates. Creativity is key. If you can drive in, do it. If you can drive out, even better. Trails aren't mandatory. If you have a park, you have someone hurt back in a field, just drive into the field. Have a ranger do it. Have a brush truck do it. Have a UTV or some sort of other thing than a Type 1 engine or a large ambulance. You have other resources available to you. Be creative as you deliver patient care. So your objectives. This is from the Denver Metro EMS protocols. The latest revision includes a section on extended care. For this to be valid, you need to have appropriate paperwork done with your medical director. I'm obviously not your medical director. Make sure that that's all squared away. But I thought it was a great example in walking through what we are doing for extended care. First and foremost, we're performing good reassessment. We're taking care of the patient's needs, paying attention to the situation. We're assessing and treating shock. That is the first and most critical thing that we are managing because that is the thing that is going to kill them the fastest. We then worry about managing coagulopathy, keeping the patient warm, handling those needs, so we're preventing hypothermia. We keep them out of the elements. We minimize secondary injuries, so take care of what we can and don't get them more hurt. We manage pain, and then we manage patient comfort. In this order of priority, this is a good backbone template we can use for patient care. So your assessment, 10-minute frequency is probably a good plan. This is what's recommended in protocol. I think it's pretty appropriate. It's a good time to stop and take a break. Have your rescuers stop too. Everyone holds up like, hey, how you doing? Talk to your patient. Assessment of the airway, ventilation, circulatory status, neurological status. A lot of that can be done with a simple, quick conversation. You can assess pain and also figure out if the patient's comfortable. Did their leg need to be repositioned a little bit? That's what they hurt. Maybe it needs to shift over a couple of inches. Maybe the way that you've secured them to the stretcher needs a little bit of work and you need to adjust some things like that. So we're assessing those conditions and paying attention to patient comfort. Next, we manage shock. First and foremost, control bleeding. Guy drops a chainsaw and it was like, you need to stop that bleeding as soon as humanly possible. The patient shouldn't be transported with open exterior bleeds. Same thing, we're managing any kind of pelvic fracture as well in the field. So pelvic binder, anything like that that's necessary. You ALS guys, I hear whole blood is coming around. I hear the guys in the flights have got whole blood. That's super cool. Maybe that's a useful tactic for you paragods to figure out how to do. For those of us that are just doing fluid administration, we're not really doing hypotension here, or trying to keep blood pressure above 100 millimeters or 100 millimeters mercury. So hold that pressure up, use fluid administration to supplement that. Remember, patients probably dehydrated when they're out in the backcountry, so we're rehydrating them and managing shock that way. Supplemental oxygen is there for you. What is walked through is using the shock index. So shock index is equal to your heart rate divided by systolic blood pressure. At your at each of the reassessment frequencies, you want that to be decreasing or remaining stable. If that starts to increase, then you start to run into a probable increase in mortality. So shock index will track that, log that as we go. So shock index, heart rate divided by systolic blood pressure. Then we're taking good effort to prevent coagulopathy and really prevent hypothermia. So we know hypothermia is a cause for pretty significant coagulopathies in trauma patients. Making sure that they stay warm, stay comfortable is essential. So your packaging of that patient needs to manage that environmental protection for them. Often we'll try and use a heat source, so you can put heat packs in the axilla, something like that. So you create warmth for that patient. They have a vapor barrier, they have a level of insulation, so you do a space blanket, then a regular kind of hospital blanket, or a fleece blanket, wool blanket, something like that, and then a weather barrier. So potentially a tarp, something like that, to provide any kind of rain or snow from keeping them from getting onto the patient. Finally, we go into active rewarming. So for the patient that's injured in a relatively cold day, anything like that, warmed IV fluids are going to be ideal, especially for that patient that's cold or that's in shock, making sure that those fluid bags are kept warm and that we're not really causing any issues with the lines as things are administered. Don't get them more hurt. Don't use a long spine board, essentially. Make sure that the patient has appropriate protective equipment. So I like to give my patients a helmet so that if anything falls or anything breaks loose, they really don't have a way to get out of the way, so we can prevent some head injury. Keep SpO2 above 90%. Keep any kind of hypoxic brain injury from taking place. Consider good personal protective equipment also for yourselves too, as you think about this. Sun protection for the patient counts too. So making sure that their face isn't getting extra sunburn. Consider having a spare pair of cheap sunglasses that you can throw onto the patient, or just kind of giving them a nice little blind spot like this, or creating some shadow. Super essential. If you've never been transported on a Stokes basket, you realize you're facing straight up the whole time. And usually it's the middle of the day, so you're facing straight into the sun. You don't have any shade, any benefit like that. So taking action to keep the patient from getting sunburned is good customer service, good patient care. Next, we manage patient pain and comfort as best as we can. So follow your local protocols. OTCs and NSAIDs are probably your best effort here because they're a little bit lower risk. You don't need to take care of all those monitoring things, but follow your local protocols effectively. Manage patient comfort as well. So plan for the patient needing to urinate. Plan for the sun baking and it being miserable. Plan for bumps, how it's going to be difficult. Communicate with your patient. That is the most important part of that. They should feel free to talk to you. You should feel free to talk to them. Hey, we got a couple bumps here. Hey, it's going to be a little weird. We got a little rocky spot. Hey, this thing's going to happen. Be very communicative with them. That helps so much when a person is on a Stokes basket and being carried out. So that's the mechanics of how we do this. Let's talk about how we get support, what manages this incident effectively, what resources you have to make this go better. First and foremost, it is essential for you to make sure that you rehab and take care of yourself and your team as you are out there. Everyone is responsible for ensuring that they rehabilitate effectively and that everyone's doing well in the group. That responsibility is even more magnified for your team leaders and ICs. Everyone needs to pay attention to folks hydrating. They need to be responsible for everyone staying hydrated. So you got to be hydrated the whole time. Those that work in wildland, there's a basic concept of like doing a 2-in-1 routine of like for every 2 units of water, you have 1 unit of Gatorade or something like that. So no one understand what makes the most sense for you. Conditions obviously dictate what works best. Physical rehab should be executed as best as you can. So if you need to take a break, take a break. Obviously communicate, don't just let go of stuff, but make sure that you have people rotating in and out and get a moment to rehab. For longer incidents, providing real rehab is essential. So get people away from the search area, get people some break time, give them a few minutes to relax, make sure we can rotate people in and out. We manage that fatigue work rest cycle. So how do we make the search go easier? I got 3 big resources that we have that help out. We have mutual aid partners and that kind of supporting resource. We have air assets, and then there's some real specialized rescue resources. It doesn't show up super well with the picture. Mutual aid partners are your first and foremost best asset to help you out. They can probably get there the soonest. They probably bring you the second best local knowledge to yours, and they can be essential in bringing you that extra manpower that you need. Consider your landowners part of that mutual aid. So the Forest Service, your Parks and Rec, your Open Space Authority, anyone like that, they're part of your mutual aid assets. Make sure that they're notified, make sure that they're on their way. Know who they are and what they bring. So when I have open space showing up, I get different assets than when I have neighboring fire districts show up. They send different people with different skills, different capabilities, different resources. Some, your neighbors may have drones, they may have UTVs, they may have all sorts of interesting and useful things that could do a really good job helping you deliver that effective rescue. Coming from the air, you have both helicopter and fixed wing assets. Helicopters are super useful for this sort of a thing. They can do search work for you, they can provide patient transportation, they can be your access to get back to where patient is located. The right helicopter resources can be used for hoisting. Know what you have, know who comes to you if you ask for them, and most importantly, go train with them. There is nothing that helps you more work with a helicopter crew than having seen them before and having know how to communicate with them and having landed a helicopter and them having familiarity, flexibility with both your area and your team of responders. Our best fixed wing asset in the area to discuss is the Division of Fire Prevention and Control's multi-mission aircraft, or MMA. This is available as a resource that is extremely capable in performing an airborne search. So they're fixed wing assets, so they're not going to land for you to perform any kind of transport, but they're super good at doing a big, high, fast search of a large area with thermal cameras, very nice kind of high zoom in cameras, can map everything for you. Work with your dispatch center to request them. They're a great resource if they're available. I try and call them on any kind of complicated SAR call that I get. You have some specialized resources likely available to you as well. Most of Colorado is covered by some variety of a mountain. Most of the mountains, particularly of Colorado, covered by some kind of a search and rescue team or a mountain rescue team. In Jefferson County, we don't bring them out to every single call that we get. I know in some counties they do. They're kind of a default first line resource. They're an extremely trained and qualified resource to be doing this kind of a thing. They're very good at going out on these extended search operations. What's important for us on the fire and EMS side to know, they typically require a very large staging area because you have a lot of people showing up in personal vehicles. Our experience has been, I need basically double what I would normally do if I have a fire response only. They may need a lot of support, so they're not bringing an ambulance with them. They're not bringing some of those assets with them, so be prepared to support them. They'll tie in with your incident command chain for the most part, and they have a long mobilization time. We've heard it nominally an hour minimum call to first people showing up time. That can be different depending on where you are. Some areas can be a lot faster, some areas can be a lot slower. Know your partners, work with them before. Finally, we have the Urban Search and Rescue Task Force out of Denver. They are a asset that is available to us for a really kind of atypical post-disaster response. They take days to mobilize and they're really expensive, so they're really not available to us for this kind of case, but it's something to know, something to think about. So mentioning a couple atypical situations, things that we don't expect to see on a backcountry call but could be relevant, things that you should know about in case they happen. Crashes do happen. In the assumption this is any kind of a crash, vehicle, aircraft, anything like that, know and understand they're typically investigated. If it's a vehicle crash, Colorado State Patrol is usually who's responsible for that. Your county authorities may do so, but CSP is usually who's involved. They're probably not going to hike out to you, so you'll need to do some, you may need to help them out. Aircraft crashes are usually investigated by the NTSB and or the FAA. So they will send people out, they will hike out, and they will document all of this as appropriate. Same, military will send people from each branch. If you're responding to a crash, obviously safety and hazard control comes first. The evidence is not as important as putting out the fire or rescuing the victim. When you show up, perform a size up, victims, conditions, plan, all the same rules apply. Execute your plan, and then establish a site control perimeter. So manage what's going on around it. Don't allow more people in there necessary. Document the site as soon as you get there, as soon as possible. Move stuff as little as possible. So the wreckage should stay where it's found unless you need to get someone out or you need to perform rescue activities. They can present hazards. Don't get cut on a piece of plane that's on the ground. Aluminum can be pretty sharp when it's all torn up. Leave personal effects, baggage, anything like that. That's all evidence as we look at this. Fire agencies can often be called to perform body recoveries for your county or as a part of this sort of a response. It's not always pleasant. It's important to remember, first and foremost, your safety in performing any of these incidents. If we're not certain, patient assessment comes first. As soon as we determine that the patient is deceased, the operational tempo needs to slow way down. As I've heard it described by an instructor, what is a body recovery? That's a training operation. Everyone takes their time, we relax, nobody should get hurt, nobody should be injured, we shouldn't have any issues on this kind of a mission. Observe the scene, figure out what you have to do, limit the disturbance to the degree possible, coordinate with law enforcement and the coroner's office. Sometimes they'll hike in with you. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll send you with their camera. Sometimes they'll want you to take pictures with yours. Try and use their camera if you can. Work with them directly. They may direct you to do specific things. They may give you things to take in, use a body bag, use this, that, and the other. Do a very good job working with them. They'll ask you to limit disturbance. You establish a control perimeter. Document this pretty well. This can be a crime scene, and your actions can have a huge difference on what takes place in the long term. So in conclusion, first and foremost, search is an emergency. It is a rapid, focused effort where we are worried about finding a person who could be in very serious trouble. Simultaneously, it is a very intensive effort. You need to be committing a lot of people and planning for a lot of people and resources to be committed. You should be methodical. Don't just do stuff. Think through what you're going to do. Think through a plan before you commit resources. And finally, you need to be prepared. Gain and understand those outdoor skills, basic knowledge, how all of this stuff comes together before calls come in. Some reminders on extended care. First priority is continuous reassessment, taking care of knowing what's going on with the patient, what needs to be done. Then we're treating shock, managing the circumstances that are preventing that, managing coagulopathy as well. Treating hypothermia, so securing the patient away from the environment, keeping them warm, keeping them comfortable. We minimize secondary injury, don't get them more hurt. Make sure you take care of their personal protective equipment. Manage their pain, especially the sooner we start that in the field, the better it is for their outcome. We manage patient comfort as well. They may need to drink some water, they may need to take a break, they may need to relieve themselves. Know and understand those and plan for it early in our operations. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening to Backcountry Rescue for Fire and EMS. This has been a presentation covering how we respond to calls away from the roadway. Any kind of a traumatic injury, medical call, anything like that, where you've got to hike in and hike out. Thank you so much. Be safe and stay learning.